When I was in seminary, one of the hot topics was an art piece that had been produced 10 years earlier. I've been singing with D too much. Earlier. Krista was a sculpture of a woman on a cross that was intended to remind people that women shared the suffering of Christ. 1975 was the first time that the image of a woman as Christ crucified had been seen. It was considered outrageous, even obscene, and it was too titillating because she had breasts. Even in agonizing death, Krista was seen as a sex object. In a way, that piece led me out of the church. During an Easter vigil, I kept envisioning the Pieta with the body of a broken woman on her lap. I had been made to understand that this was not an image that could be discussed, let alone produced. I knew then that I had to leave, even though I had no idea at that point where I was going. As I've been thinking about what now seems to be a series on ritual responses to human experience, the Jesus words from communion come to mind. This is my body, broken for you. These words are important to our Universalist roots. It was believed, or however we want to go there, that it was the willing sacrifice of Jesus, rather than the resurrection, by which hell was abolished for all times. I could never have imagined how important it would be for me to hear this, even long after I had left the Christian tradition and found a more earth-centered and women-centered path and practice. So often, to hear those words, you have to break through a wall of really inferior theology. In the Catholic Church, among members, I admit I have not heard it from professional religious, but they had to get it somewhere. You hear about offering up your suffering for Christ. What can that possibly mean? If Jesus' sacrifice was the ultimate one, how does my wrenched shoulder make that sacrifice lighter? In other traditions, your wrenched shoulder couldn't even be sympathized with because it didn't hold a candle to Jesus' suffering. Which is true because it must be said a wrenched shoulder and a crucifixion are in fairly different magnitudes of pain. But that's sort of not the point. What has happened is that we have begun to disregard real suffering. Do we, because of social and other kinds of media, have a form of battlefield fatigue? This year has been a powerful reminder that say what we will about the worth and dignity of all human beings and the interconnected web, there are certain kinds of pain and suffering that stay invisible. This is in part why there has been such outrage about Black Lives Matter. If all lives really mattered, Michael Brown would not have been left lying in the street, let alone shot. There would be outrage about the brutal rapes going on college campuses, and gun violence by disaffected young white men would be non-existent. People with disabilities would not be funding care on social media, and people would have enough to eat. And the earth, our precious, precious earth, so generous and giving, would not be dying and killing people as it does with its extreme storms and surges. This list, or any other list you make, is overwhelming. It's hard, listening to this, to understand where you might start and how anything you or we do or could make a difference. But at the Presbyterian Church in Princeton, where my cousin attends with her beau, in their class on gun violence, they're challenged to come to class with one difference that they can make. Jim, who is a middle school science teacher, is going to devise family science problems that allow people to talk about statistics and issues. He's used this device often for his 8th graders. He knows it works. He'll pass it on. We'll get a copy. That is what he can do. It's little and it's doable. And I like that reminder that we can't solve the whole problem. We can solve this much. But if things are going to change, we need to do something. I Googled, because I'd forgotten, the number of children that died at Sandy Hook. What I found first was a Snopes.com article that talked about the fact that no children had died, that this was simply a media conspiracy to take away gun owners' rights and weapons that was dreamed up just as 9/11 was. In their world, no towers fell. 20 children didn't die, or their 6 teachers. Almost 3,000 people didn't die on 9/11. Wouldn't that be nice? 1 in 3 women will be victims of sexual assault in their lifetime. That's not people out there. That's people in here as well. Look around. That's 1 in 3 of us. Well, women. Right. Some we know about. Some have never been told. Some are even so deeply suppressed they may not remember. In Bill's class the other day, a woman said that her daughter was sent home from school because the rule says that women's collarbones need to be covered so as not to, I don't even know what verb I might use here, about stirring up young men to such a sexual frenzy that they cannot study. One quakes to think what they might do and give permission to boys to do if they catch a woman in the hall with her clavicles naked and exposed. And then the other night, Sue Jamison posted this quote from an article. At the same time, statistics show that more than 1/3 of women murdered in the U.S. are killed by a male intimate partner. Domestic violence numbers hold steady across religious lines, even though 74% of faith leaders reportedly underestimate the level of sexual and domestic violence experienced in their congregations. 2 out of 3 pastors report discussing domestic or intimate partner violence only once or less in any given year. What's more, one survey of almost 6,000 pastors showed that more than 50% of those surveyed would advise that women learn to submit to abuse and tolerate violence rather than leave their spouse or seek divorce. It's 2015, and we still think rape happens because men have uncontrollable urges. We haven't stood up to defend our men who are well capable of restraining themselves, and we're not being demanding enough about stopping the violence. People say about violence, oh, that would be the men, get to that place of rage and they can't help themselves. But they do help themselves. They don't beat up on their bosses or their best friends. They beat up on women because it's acceptable. They kill them and get short sentences. Women hire their men killed and are executed, while the executioner leaves prison after a short sentence. And was it uncontrollable urges that led to Matthew Shepard's being crucified 17 years ago? Or just fear of things that the killers convinced themselves Matthew would have done to them? And did we see his death as a crucifixion and say, let there be no more fag bashing? Did people of all faith, enough people that it made a difference, say that you shall not harm people in this parody of the death of Jesus and his love? Sadly, no. The death and the suicide of young LGBTQ, is it II or IA now? There's the list keeps going on. Continues unabated at rates wildly over the mainstream population. The suicides are a result of bullying and these children's failures to imagine a world that will accept them as they are and love them fiercely, and they are aided in their disbelief in goodness. Are we so horrified by accounts of abuse of elders or people with disabilities that we have risen up and stopped it? Because the rates are egregious. Much of the abuse is financial, but plenty of it is emotional and financial. There is good news further on down the line, but there's bad news. And and too often, because places are not accessible, both our elders and our people with disabilities are unable to go places. When I think about a new church home, I think not only about accessible toilets, but the need for a music venue where people can be comfortable just walking or rolling in the door. One of the most painful moments for me in the Coates story Between the World and Me is when he doesn't go in to comfort his child after Michael Brown, because he says, my son will have to learn to deal with this. And as far as Coates can tell, nothing is going to change. In the film Cracking the Codes, a woman talked about how mothers in white culture can't understand when black moms don't brag on their kids. This woman explained, if your child was too smart, too talented during slavery, the master would sell your child. Today, being proud of your child might cause him to become brash and cocky kids get killed. We are the caretaker of brown boys in this community and in our own lives. We need to find ways to put a stop to this resigned acceptance that it will always be that way. We need to make it possible for fathers to offer not false assurances, but real conviction that things are changing. Right now they are changing, and not necessarily for the better. This whole gun violence and dead school children and their teachers, and frankly anyone, I really think we have to ask ourselves, which dead baby will be the acceptable last dead baby? At what point do we rise up? Is it naive to believe that we have that power? Yesterday, reading the Swedish papers, I saw a shocked response to the knifing in Trollhättan, where 2 were killed because there is no access to guns, and the police made a big point about that if that had been here, that a lot more people would have been killed. But there was a little meme that said something like, we refuse to become this country. We are kinder and more compassionate than this. The police from Trollhättan are overset. It's the first time they've killed anyone. It's the first time for many of them they've drawn a gun. And I don't know, we keep saying, Sweden, we heard this thing on the Democratic debate the other day. Well, we're not Denmark, and Denmark's a little country. We're not Sweden. Sweden's a little country. I remember it wasn't when I was living there, it was later, but they walked up to the government and said, no, we're not going to have nuclear energy. No, we're just not going to have it. And the government went like, oh, okay, we're not going to have nuclear energy. And they started looking at other options. So maybe. Will they do something? Can they? Can we? Is there really nothing we can do? We are a little but mighty congregation, and little things and little faith communities do make a difference. It's in the midst of bureaucratic haze at the moment, but one phone call to the ACLU to say women prisoners get only 5 sanitary pads a month has 3 organizations, national organizations, working on the problem. We can't solve huge problems, but we can pull small threads. And as we do, as each of us pulls our little thread, things can make a difference. But we have to keep making the call to action. I think it starts by understanding that the body is sacred. It is so easy, especially in our tradition, to believe that the mind is the pinnacle of creation. But our bodies are sacred. Even though this was the focus of my seminary thesis, how often do I preach about it? Body, mind, spirit, heart, all 4 matter. Yesterday at the funeral, I called the directions because Janet was a pagan, and I remembered, I could feel again why that process means so much to me. Each of those parts has a wisdom all its own. Each of those parts of us has worth and dignity. When we don't, can't, won't see the indignities done to the body, we can't see the miracles either. The earth breaks open and gives us food. Love can break a woman's body open in childbirth. Love can break our minds open into acceptance. As a religious community, it is our job to learn to give gratitude for the first, to bless and celebrate the second, and to get to work on the third. This is where we can lead, and indeed will have to lead, because few are leading. There are so few of us. Before we moved here, the big deal consultant said, this could be 1,000-member congregation. Maybe then the district and the UUA would pay some attention to us. I drank that Kool-Aid for a while, I admit it. But I've been challenged on that enough to ask, not only is that a realistic goal, but also to determine whether or not it's a desirable one. So we're 1,000 members, so what? We still have to ask what difference we will make in the valley. And unless we did something that caused the extra 875 people to be standing outside our doors one Sunday holding buckets of cash to play for the chairs we needed to rush out and get for them, we don't have the infrastructure or the people power for such an influx. And it's not that I'm ruling out growth, but it's better if it's slow and steady. Thinking about that, talking about it a bit with the board and board members, it's interesting that we're all of a sudden getting nibbles from other congregations about at least thinking together. The synagogue wants to possibly do some classes with us. Zion Lutheran Church, someone from Zion Lutheran Church called me up and said, and he called me up in response to having heard me speak about love flows. We have a meeting where we talk on issues once a week, a small group that meets for dinner afterwards on Wednesday. I thought, but didn't say, you meet every Wednesday? But they'd like us to join them. I can't commit to an every Wednesday thing, but I'll certainly try to get there once a month. And if anybody else is interested, I'd love to have you with me or without me. They are meeting, they sometimes show a film, they talk about a book. They've asked me to send them the names of the books that we've just read. But I thought it was lovely. And if we're going to pull threads in this valley, I think the thing is to get other thread pullers involved. It was interesting, too, that I went to present to the progressives, again, about love flows. And they're having a symposium, and we just got invited to have a table at an organization or at an organizational meeting they're having that presents organizations doing good in the community, and invited us because they've met here. They said, please, we'll waive the fee, come, bring your stuff on Love Flows, hand out information, have a donation can. Last meeting they had 60 people at, but all of those 60 people belong to other organizations, and they're interested in Love Flows and want to play ball, and that's wonderful. I think our work is on a lot of levels. We have to make all these unwelcome connections, and then we have to recall life's sacredness. I mean, I was so moved this week, as I said, or I think you could hear in my voice, at the opportunity to sit with these people who were so devastated and who had nobody coming in. And I'm always shocked at people's trust and willingness to let total strangers hold their hearts and to tell them secrets, and both of them, or for them to tell me secrets, I wasn't telling any, but to turn to each other at some point and say, honey, you've never said that to me before. But the need is so big for that place to be. So we have to recall life's sacredness and take our own individual and collective baby steps towards a more just world. It's what we're called to do as religious people. It's what is right. And we can do this. This is the body of the people, and we are the caretakers. I've always liked the Lucan version of the Last Supper when Jesus implies, or perhaps I just infer, that it is in the shared meals that we are empowered to face what comes before us, or comes ahead. And I believe he asked in that moment to remember that when we next gather to feast, that he was once one of us, in the same way that we remember as we sing that hymn, that Dave has been one of us. I think we all want, that what we all want when our time has come is to be remembered and to be kept alive in the group. And in that remembering is love. Yesterday, Jody Horn posted to my page an article about a restaurant in Jerusalem that's offering free hummus to Arabs and Jews who share a table. When you eat my beautiful hummus, he said, you cannot think of war. I wrote to Sonia, I posted it to Sonia, who wrote, they stole our idea, and blessings on them for that. But maybe we need a second hummus off with olives and feta and good bread, and to throw open the doors wide to a larger community. We could do it as a fundraiser for the Love Project or something, and build community relations. We can lead with our open hearts and minds. We're doing that with the OWL program. We're beginning with our race conversations. The progressives, as I said, just invited us to talk about love flows, to gather more allies. We can concentrate on these, but not everyone's interested in these issues. Which issues are you interested in? There are many ways to interpret the Jesus story, and many parts of it, but part of the story is about a struggle between orthodoxy and meaning. Part of the story is about love. We've decided as a tradition where we are about orthodoxy. I believe we're still working on the love piece. These are our bodies. Do we put them on the line for other bodies who are so desperately endangered? It is naive, I believe, to think that if we do not, that we are somehow buying our own insurance with the trade-offs. But it is also right and just to do just that. These are our bodies. May we break them open in love and justice and peace. Blessed be.